One of the reasons we have a panic on our hands in the United States is because people don't have any access to information. Right? The fact is that because a lot of the early coronavirus testing kits failed, we don't know who has coronavirus and who does not in the United States, which is why we've ended up with this sort of bizarre miasmatic feeling that anybody could have it, when in reality, very few people in the United States have actually been diagnosed with coronavirus. With all that said, this would be a time, as we're going to discuss in a little while, for the President of the United States and Congress to seriously consider measures like trying to coordinate a federal, state, and local response in terms of event planning. Right? What size of events should go forward? What should the state not allow to go forward in terms of size of event? And you're seeing a lot of local communities taking the lead in all of this. I'm most aware of my local Jewish community. I know that major Purim events, right? Tonight is Purim, which is a major Jewish gathering, big parties happening all over the world. I know that in the Jewish community in Los Angeles, major events are being canceled, like Purim carnivals are being canceled. I know that at schools, local Jewish schools, they're now testing kids who are walking in the door. They're giving them temperature tests, and if they are above a certain temperature, they're sending them home for whatever good that is. So people on the local level across the country are taking voluntary steps to try and mitigate the effects of this virus. Obviously, best advice is still best advice. If you got a cough into your sleeve, cough into a napkin. If you got to touch your face, try not to touch your eyes, try not to touch your mouth, try not to touch your nose. I know it's difficult. If you should be washing your hands as much as possible, especially after you go to the restroom. You should do that anyway. But when you go to a new place, when you go to work, first thing you should do, you should go wash your hands. You should sing yourself happy birthday twice, not the Stevie Wonder version. That'll take you like 14 minutes, like the actual short version of happy birthday. You sing the ABC song to yourself. Right? These are all the pieces of advice that everybody is giving, and they are good pieces of advice. Social distancing is something that people are taking into account at this point, which frankly I'm comfortable with. I don't like being within a certain distance of other human beings. So, try to be outside of like 2.5 feet, 3 feet of somebody. Handshaking apparently is bad because you can transmit germs that way. Instead, go for like a fist bump or an elbow bump or something if you're going to greet somebody. These are all the steps that we can take. But in the absence of information, it's hard not to feel panic because the normal human response to lack of information is obviously going to be fear and protection, right? The amygdala, the fear center of your brain, is going to respond. And when the media coverage is so blanket this way, it is very difficult not to feel caught up in it. And that's what you're seeing in the markets today. If the media during flu season covered flu wall to wall, if all you got during flu season was flu outbreak here, flu outbreak there, here's how many people in the United States are dying today, here's how many people worldwide are dying, we would be panicked every year about the flu. Now, by all available information, coronavirus is more deadly than the flu. The question is by what multiple? So is it a multiple of 10? Is it a multiple of 20? Is it a multiple of 4? We don't really know at this point, but suffice it to say that the media attention combined with lack of information and repetition of the same conflicting information over and over is making people feel very uneasy. This is being reflected in the market. So this morning, the stock futures had already dumped over the weekend, and finally that materialized. The early morning trading, the S&P 500 sank 7% shortly after opening. The Dow Jones Industrial Average cratered as much as 2,000 points before it clawed back a little bit. The Dow actually had to be shut down. I mean, they shut down the Dow for 15 minutes. They shut down the stock market for 15 minutes to allow people to sort of regain their bearings with reality. The stock market has basically stayed the same since then. It dropped briefly. The early morning trading over the weekend, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was at about basically 25,000. It was at 24,992.36. It dumped immediately, like in the opening minutes, all the way down to below 24,000. So it dumped 2,000 points in the opening minutes of the stock market. It paused for 15 minutes. It dumped a little bit more, and then there was sort of a slight recovery. It would not be a shock if by the end of the day there was another dump, because the bottom line is that people who are investing in short-term trading are not looking at this market and feeling that the market is being quieted. According to the Washington Post, the forced freeze was a sign of unprecedented volatility for Wall Street amid the most turbulent trading in recent memory. Another 15-minute halt will be triggered if the S&P 500's losses hit the 13% threshold. In the event of a 20% decline, markets would actually shut down for the entire day. Now, that is speculative, that the markets would dump that much, that there'd be that much of a dump. Now, listen, here's the reality. If you are investing over the long haul, that's actually a fantastic time to buy. But over the long haul, not over the short haul, not for the next year, not for the next 6 months. If you're investing over the next 30 years, now's a great time to buy, right? You got a little bit of a market discount. But if you are investing over the next 2 years or 5 years, anybody who tells you they know what's going to happen over the next year is lying to you. Nobody knows what's going to happen over the next year because nobody has enough information about coronavirus, the disruption of global supply lines, whether this thing is actually being mitigated in China or whether the reports are just going down, whether there are secondary infections available. Now there are rumors that COVID-19 actually has two strains and that one strain is less deadly and there's a second strain that's more deadly and you can be reinfected. Like, we just don't know enough at this point, which is what you are seeing in the markets. And the fact that there is no credible, globally coordinated response to this thing. And all you see are headlines about 15 million Italians being quarantined, right? That sort of stuff is going to make people pretty damned uneasy. Greg McBride, the chief financial analyst at Bankrate, said the bull market's 11-year birthday is today, but investors are not in a celebratory mood, with trading halted shortly after the open as markets plunged. The uncertain economic impact of coronavirus continues to grip markets, with stocks, commodities, and interest rates all dropping sharply. Markets hate uncertainty. There's a ton of it currently in play. That, of course, is exactly right. I mean, the fact is that airlines, I got 2 emails from separate airlines this morning. I'm sure all the airlines sent emails this morning about what they are doing about coronavirus, pledging to bleach the entire insides of planes, basically. They've used the bleach typically overnight in like the lavatories, but now they're talking about bleaching entire planes. They talk about the sort of air recirculation they've been using on planes, the filters they've been using on planes to get coronavirus out of the air. If, God forbid, somebody on the planes has coronavirus, the sort of testing protocols they have in place for fever and all the rest of this sort of stuff. The travel industry is taking a bath, just taking an absolute bath, right? The U.S. government has already recommended that nobody go on a cruise. So that means that the cruise industry is basically shut down. The airline industry is basically going to shut down over the next several weeks. You're going to see people canceling trips en masse. I would be very surprised if over the next few months, you don't see the cancellation of, maybe over the next couple of weeks, of major sporting events because of local concerns about the spread of coronavirus. The economy is going to grind to a halt. And the question is going to be how long the economy grinds to a halt for, right? Which sectors of the economy are hardest hit? Now, the Dow Jones Industrial Average and the S&P 500 dumping, part of that also has to do with a major oil war that is going on between the Saudis and the Russians. So the commodities market is taking a dump. People are rushing to treasuries, but the problem is that as you rush to treasuries and the interest rates go down, that is not actually spurring people to borrow money from the government. The government, the Fed, has been lowering its rate. Who wants to expand their business in the middle of what could be a prolonged recession? We'll get to more of this in just one second. Again, none of this is to spread panic, because I keep saying, like, we just don't know enough to panic at this point. But it is to say that there is justifiable concern today. And unless we see more information emerge relatively soon from the state, local, and federal government, unless we start seeing some real answers as to these rates, this uncertainty is going to prevail. And that's not unreasonable. It's not unreasonable for uncertainty to prevail. Again, this doesn't mean go panic buy everything off the shelves at Costco. It doesn't mean that everyone around you is going to get coronavirus. Your risk is still relatively low. But to not take this seriously would be tomfoolery. And by the way, for all those Democrats who are saying that Republicans were calling this a hoax, that is not true. What Republicans were saying was a hoax is blaming this on Trump. This is not Trump's fault. Right? It's hard to see how, given the resources at his disposal, the reaction could have been appreciably different from the federal government. Right? Trump's rhetoric could have been appreciably different, and that would have been helpful. But in terms of what the federal government has done and continues to do, the federal government just approved over $8 billion in coronavirus spending over the weekend. So I'm hard-pressed to see what Trump should be doing that he is not doing at this point. Facts don't care about your feelings, and it's a fact that The Ben Shapiro Show is the largest conservative podcast in the nation. Be sure to hit the subscribe button to stay up to date on all of our content.